Hello and welcome everyone to today's session. We'll be talking about building a winning edge AI strategy for 2024. My name is Carm Taglienti and I'm the Chief Data Officer for Insight, and I'm joined by Kristen Call from Intel. Kristen, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Carm. Like you said, my name is Kristen Call. I am the Senior Industry Advisor for Consumer Industries. What that entails is retail, banking, hospitality, entertainment. And I'm really glad to be here and chat about one of my favorite subjects.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here. So first, we want to talk about the importance of an AI edge strategy in retail. And so we're going to talk about things like operational efficiency, for example. So how can we make things more effective for the retail industry based on the use cases that we might be thinking about? Or improve security, for example. So how do we ensure that when we deploy an edge solution, for example, how can we ensure that it's secure? We're talking about data that may be being captured by computer vision systems, maybe images of people. How do we protect that information, or even proprietary information from the edge? Also, we're talking about workforce satisfaction. So how do we make the opportunities and the productivity for the workforce better, and then allow the menial labor tasks, for example, to be done? Give a good example here is one of just watching cameras, for example. When you're looking for things like either security or inventory, instead of a human watching the computer, for example, screen, you're allowing them to be able to leverage AI capabilities to be able to do simple things like count inventory. And then we'll also talk about health and safety as application domains, or enhanced customer experiences so that you can move customers through the store more effectively. Of course, what's really important in this area is scalability. So when we think about doing more within the retail facility, I like to call it point of presence. It allows us to be able to do this more effectively by creating applications that are scalable, and then using the effective efficiencies, within the context of the deployment of the platforms that we create to be able to put more on them to allow us to be able to accomplish more within the store facility itself. We'll also talk about this concept of data-driven decision-making, because that's really critical when we think about how can we make decisions more effectively. Well, using data to do it is clearly the biggest part of it, as we all are well aware. And then finally, resource optimization. So how do we optimize our resources that we have available in the store? And cameras are a good one, right? So the cameras are already deployed within the context of the retail stores or retail facilities. So how can we take advantage of those? And so that's really what we'll be talking about today. So it'll be an exciting conversation. I'm excited to invite Kristen into the conversation here to talk about it. And so we'll kind of move on to digging into some of these categories. So first, we're going to talk about the platform architecture for retail. And I think we'll start off there. And here you can see just sort of a depiction of what this might look like. And I'll pass it over to you, Kristen, and we can talk a little bit about what this looks like and then how we can take advantage of these platforms.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people might be asking, why would we start here? You just mentioned a whole plethora of different use cases that AI are really important for. But as we start to dive in and have these conversations with retailers, we find that they're just not ready to deploy these at scale. The infrastructures are very legacy, structured, and being able to move more to this modern architecture. So if you move from the left to the right, you can see that today a lot of the retailers they have specific applications per device, right? So they're very monolithic. They typically don't talk until it hits the data lake. And this makes it very difficult to scale. So as retailers start to think about how do I bring in, other applications, how do I bring AI, computer vision, and other solutions? How do I maximize all of my compute at the edge and in my store? These are important questions because as you look at AI, the compute requirement, it can increase, especially if you want to do things around loss prevention, computer vision, self-checkout. Those kinds of use cases are pretty intensive. So if we start looking at containerization, virtualizing our applications, they can live on the same box and not impact if one solution is, something is crashing or something's happening. they can live on the same box without impacting each other. So starting with the infrastructure is really important as part of that strategy, right? Today is talking about a strategy, not just let me go find one solution to match up with a problem. And I think that's the biggest difference as we start talking about AI.
Yeah, I think that's really critical. And the one thing that I like to talk a lot about in this context is point of presence. And so we want to make sure that we can enhance the experience for the consumer or even for the user in terms of being able to make decisions when you need them and as quickly as you can. So latency can be a problem here, especially when you're doing data-driven decision-making processes. So putting that compute or the capacity there to be able to address these issues is really important. And I think what we're finding is that with the ability from component providers like Intel to allow us to be able to take that compute, put it at the edge, and allow us to be able to do more within the retail facility, we can see this enhanced experience. I mean, we've all been in the airport where we can do things like self-checkout. We can see the kinds of experiences that are starting to come, which are made available by the fact that the inventory is being able to is managed more effectively. So you can do things like proactively stock shelves or put things in locations where they need to be put in order for us to be able to take advantage of them. So there's a lot going on there that we may not even realize, but we know that the experience is good. And I think that that's really what probably what the retailers want, is that the fact that you walk into the store, you have a great experience, and then you come back again. And that's really what this is all about, I think, at the end of the day. But there are a lot of details to it, right? So the diagram that you just saw was pretty complicated when you think about the everything that goes behind it. But the idea here is that working with partners like Intel allows us to be able to do this effectively. So when we say platform, we really mean an integrated platform capability that allows us to be able to take that platform, deploy it, and then take advantage of the capacity and capabilities that are there that address many of those issues that I was talking about in the beginning, especially around things like security. That allows us to be able to deploy a secure environment, integrate with existing components that might already be there in the retail facility, like the cameras, for example, or other systems where we want to integrate data, or even be able to leverage the compute capacity for running models, for example, because we talked about AI, and we can run those models then on the compute capacity that's available through the platforms that Intel delivers. And so these are really the important part of taking advantage of this infrastructure. And it's not so much that it's a canned infrastructure, but it's more of these integrated components are made available to us so we can move faster, deliver speed. Speed to value is really going to be important for us in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I came from retail, spent 25 plus years in retail, and edge applications were what I managed. And when you want to deploy, especially point of sale, it was one of the things that you probably only did twice a year. And if you were really cool, you were doing it maybe every 3 months or something, right? But that really doesn't keep up with the business needs. If they want to do some A/B testing, try different features and functions for interacting with customers, those kinds of things can be done with the right architecture, with microservices, containerization, those kinds of things. So it's really helping. This isn't. We kind of dive right into the technology. This is how do we solve the business challenges with the technology, the right technology architecture.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think leveraging, you mentioned containerization and talked about sort of this distributed architecture model. And it really is it's an empowering capability because of the fact that the business is still really, nobody's going to come to us and say, hey, I need containerization. That's going to make my consumer experience much better. But it is an enabler for us because it allows us to be able to do things like scale, or for example, or maybe even security. We can do that much more effectively. And I think that is really that underlying mechanism to be able to support scale and to also, I'll say, just sort of create independent functions that can be integrated easily together. It allows us to also be able to update things more quickly, or to be able to even, there are situations where we might say, okay, maybe we do have isolated failures, but we can also embed resiliency because we're leveraging things like containerization, just as an example. Because that's the reality of the situation. When you're deploying something out to the field, the conditions of the field can be much different than they would be, say, in a data center or even in the cloud. So at the edge, we do have to worry about things like, maybe where we're putting a device, it may not be the most pristine environment. Maybe it's being kicked every once in a while by, the cleaners, and all of a sudden the system could potentially go down. So we have to have that kind of resiliency built in. So what do we do in those particular cases? And then leveraging these advanced capabilities, things like containerization or resiliency, even in the hardware domain, allows us to be able to have a robust infrastructure that allows us to address the SLAs that we would expect within the context of these environments. And so I'm getting off into a little bit of an esoteric area, but in general, we really don't want to think too much about that, but we want to have confidence that Intel and our partners are going to be able to deliver these kinds of solutions, so they don't, go bump in the night and everybody has to worry about the fact that the system's no longer working, and then who do I call to fix it, for example, because there's nothing worse than that, at the end of the day.
They're going to call Insight.
That's right. Exactly.
We want things to work. That's right.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. I think this picture, even though it does touch on, from a technology perspective, it also kind of hints at overall strategy with how to look at things differently, right? So AI isn't just, I want to go do loss prevention or, singularity of a use case. How can I bring multiple use cases using, one camera feed, or, bringing IoT data inside to do many use cases. So it really kind of, I don't want to use the word shatter, but it kind of shatters the way that we look at things, and things to be more holistic, higher level. I think that's going to be the job of those IT leaders, to kind of help streamline these decision-making processes.
Right, for sure. I've seen this actually a lot, and you probably have too, and it's not just retail customers, but across the board. These kinds of solutions, there are cases when a certain customer wants to deploy a system maybe for inventory control, and then maybe they have one for theft prevention. What I've seen in the past is that there were two separate systems. And so it was never really this concept of the integrated platform like you're describing, or which I think is really the way we need to go. But there were separate systems, and we deployed separate hardware to be able to support it, which seems silly, but it was just the reality of the situation. I think probably last generation. The new generation is mostly about, well, how can I take advantage of the hardware components, because I need the CPU, I need the GPU, I need the memory, I need the protection of the operating system. And I want to sort of consolidate that all because I want to monitor it all at the same time so that I can ensure that it stays up when I need it. And those are all really critical. Instead of saying I've got 37 different applications running on separate hardware platforms, which kind of seems silly. And we are in the world of really, we need to contemplate the fact that, people don't have infinite pocketbooks. So we need to think about, well, how do we leverage these capabilities so that we can do as much as we can with them, and also then create I'll call it a higher order business impact across the board. And that's kind of really where we want to go with this. But I think along those lines, maybe we can talk a little bit, Kristen, about what are some of the hardware and software considerations. We talked about sort of consolidating, but things like, where is Intel investing in terms of increasing the capacity of the CPU to be able to support this, or to give us better performance across the board? So what kinds of things is Intel doing that allow the edge applications, as we're describing in the platform sense? How is it that we can do better? So that's the kind of thing we're probably good to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect segue because it's top of mind, and I know a lot of retailers are testing different types of solutions out today. And what often comes up is, well, what should I be using today? Is it 13th gen? What should I be using? And it is true that the chips that are coming out, especially in the future, are going to be AI enabled. And they're really going to be able to land those types of workloads more efficiently. Intel is also heavily invested in the software side. How do you optimize those computer vision workloads so that they can run most efficiently at the edge, and not have to, and I'm going to say not have to use a GPU? or an integrated GPU. Because as we start to look at retail is a very, in my mind, is very specific because they're dealing with thousands of locations. It's not just a manufacturing site where there's just one or two. This is thousands of locations, and managing that hardware stack is challenging, and it has to be considered. And so we have these conversations with retailers. It's how can we work with your ISVs? How do we work with, having these conversations to find the right hardware to be able to make these technologies work best for you, not just right now, but 5 years down the road or 10 years, whatever that longevity of the hardware looks like. And it can go from point of sale, it can go from the back office servers, and do we move from the term appliance to a server in the back room, right? Because that's what these kinds of workloads will take.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why we love working with Intel is because when we work together, we could really just talk about things in terms of workload capacity. So as opposed to this application runs on this, like I was talking about before, those sort of siloed applications where it's like, in order to run this application, you need to buy this equipment. Those, I wouldn't say those days are over necessarily. I hope they are, but we know they're probably not. But in general, we really want to talk about how can we measure the workload expectations and then define the workload capacity that's required, and then really size it to the platform. So we can say this platform will support, like you were saying, this AI enabled applications, so that we can say, well, within this platform, I can run these kinds of workloads. And so there I can think about, this is the kind of thing that I want to approach for my use cases that may support my business moving forward. And there's lots of different use cases that we can think of. And then I think it also allows us to be able to, I'll get to the distributed point as well. Instead of saying I need to replace that box necessarily, in a distributed world, I could say I'm adding capacity, whether I'm flexing to the cloud or maybe it's even on-prem, but it's more of I put another box there. Now I can use distributed applications through containerization to be able to take advantage of the fact that now I've got additional capacity. I can start to run my new applications or even larger applications within the context of what I have. So kind of call it a mini edge data center, if you will. But it really is just a distributed application leveraging the latest advances from the Intel platform. And I think that that's really kind of a cool model for us moving forward, because it's not just the cloud that can scale in this capacity. It's like we can even do this at the edge.
Yeah, and working with you as a partner, Insight has been critical in helping our retailers understand what those workloads look like, right? You're bringing your knowledge, you're bringing the things that you guys are doing, and together we're figuring this out, because if it was easy, it would already be done. And so it does take a collaboration and an effort between all, the whole ecosystem to get this right for the retailer. Every retailer has very specific needs. Their challenges are a little bit different. And because when I say retail, it might be grocery store, it might be big box, it might be convenience store. There's a lot of different categories that fall under retail, and each one of them have specific issues that they're dealing with.
Right. Yeah. And there are so many customizations. We've talked about a few use cases, but I think one of the things that's pretty exciting that I wanted to talk about with you today was store of the future. So what would store of the future look like in terms of what can we expect as we look to 2024 and beyond? And it's a lot of excitement, I think, in this area. So retailers are looking to be able to integrate things like Gen AI, for example. And so these are the kinds of things that I think we want to figure out. Well, what do I need in order to be able to get there? And so, we could talk maybe about some of those. And I think this is probably a good example of what does an omnichannel solution look like? What does it entail? And how can we embrace these capabilities?
Yeah, it's continuing that digital transformation, right? So how do I bring that experience online into the store? How do I support the journey, or I call it path to purchase, for my customer? So removing frictionless points, bringing in personalization. And I like this kind of a view, because it's a bird's eye view of the store, and what is the customer journey, and where am I going to impact that journey? Do I want to understand what shelves they're looking at? Maybe I threw a promotion out there, but it's not yet personalized. So I want to know, did this person get this promotion, and did they go to the shelf? Did they look at things? Did they, what did they do? And as retailers, they have a lot of data, but without AI, you're not quite sure what to do with all that data. Because it would take, thousands of man hours to dig through to figure out what to do. And that's one of the great things about AI, is to help figure out what do you do with all that data, whether, and all the personalization and things like that. But you can go out to the parking lot, you can go into the back room, you can find product, you can understand your supply chain. There's a lot of different things to be able to do, continue to build that experience for the customer, for that omni-channel experience.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned this, and this is certainly, and it's not just because I'm the CDO, but it's like data, it's all about the data. This is what we're really looking at. So how do we integrate that data? But I think an important point to what you're describing is, well, two important points. One is that integration of that data is critical. So in order for you to get an omni-channel experience, we need to understand, how do we collect all of that data and then define what it represents in terms of that, multi-layered experience, so that we can derive intelligence from it, so that we know what to do. If the expectation is to maybe, drive customers through the store in a certain way to maximize their experience, and maybe the maximization of their experience is find everything you need with the shortest path, if you will, through the store, then, maybe that's something where we would know someone's behavior. And I don't want to get too big brother here, but, you kind of know what they're in the store for. So you can help guide them through the store from an effective way, not from a selling them more stuff way, but that's something that we can do as well. Because most people are like, it's kind of like the early days of recommendation engines. People were getting nervous. It's like, well, maybe you know too much about me. But I think in a lot of ways, you're like, I just want to get in and out, So, but I think the integration of data is really one good place to start.
Well, but getting in and out means I know the product's there. I know where to go get it. I know that you have it, right? That it sounds simple, but in today's world, that can be very complex, especially for the consumer. I'm on my phone. I'm trying to figure out, where do I go? Do I go to Target? Do I buy it online? Do I do a BOPUS order? All these kinds of things go through a consumer's mind, and the retailer's like frantically, like, how do I get in front of that decision process before the customer makes, where they're going to go make a purchase. And so that's very complex. It's a very complex problem. And that's where intelligence comes in.
For sure. Yeah. And I almost see, Gen AI is amazing. And it's certainly something that's changing the way that we think about these problem domains. I also think that, we talk about co-pilots, but I think in this particular case, it could be something as simple as an assistant, right? So we have the information, we can interact with an assistant as we move through the store, and maybe it does know a little bit about our past behavior, but in general, it could just be tell me where this is, tell me where that is, help guide me to this location. Do we have this inventory? And it makes it simple. So you theoretically, you could actually just use your phone, for example, to be able to interact with the store systems, to be able to enhance that experience by tapping into this data, so to speak, by using chatbot or other kinds of interfaces that make it really simple for you. And I think that's where we're going with all of this. And it's not so much replacing, necessarily what it is that we would do. Like, maybe there are going to be automated, shoppers. You just press a button at the beginning of the store and this automated shopper goes through like a robot. But I think in general, most people would appreciate the help make this a better experience for me. Let me ask it questions and guide me kind of models.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it brings the imagination of what's possible, right? If I'm in the grocery store and I don't know what to make for dinner, well, maybe I'm in the pasta aisle staring at pasta, and up on my phone, it pops up a recipe knowing that I had purchased these things in the past, or, hey, the last 50 customers that were, picked this recipe to be their favorite or whatever. It doesn't, because it doesn't necessarily have to be, just for you. It could be, hey, other people love this. You might like it too. That's what Amazon is really good at. And then it picks up on your preferences of when you select something. So how do you bring that to the store? That's where the future is headed, is there. And it doesn't sound creepy at all. I really would need help with what should I make for dinner?
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's that sounds like fun. The interesting thing about what you were mentioning earlier is, there are really two characteristics when we think through the use of AI within these environments. And one is that, sometimes people, when we think about AI, it's there are really two modalities. One is that we need to collect data and train data so that we can actually learn something. And then the other one is really just the application of it. And so I think within these retail facilities, we need to think about how much of it is one modality versus the other. So it's in some ways, if you're going to say perform a specific task like a recommendation, you don't have to dynamically train your data all the time to be able to do it. You can create an inference engine, you could deploy it, and then allows you to be able to do those recommendations. And that requires a certain set of compute capacity to be able to do that. And then the other side of it is I'm collecting a whole bunch of data. I want to train a model, and then I want to update that model. That requires a different kind of capacity, like more of the, sort of the classic GPU style compute, which allows me to be able to train fast, and then also be able to then produce a result so that I can deploy it. And I think that's an important part as well, is understand where the workload is, where your capacity is, and then how to deploy the right sets of workloads to the right locations. And I think that's, the other part of what we were talking about. So by taking this containerized distributed approach and then leveraging the multi-purpose, chipsets that are available from Intel, we know where to put things to be able to run them fast enough so that it allows us to be able to deliver the kind of experience we're expecting, whether it's a fast training experience or it's going to be a fast user experience, so that they can, get that recommendation, so that when they're passing the Cheez-Its, they know that should be part of their dinner for the night. I'm just kidding. But you never know. It's like a Top Chef thing, right? It could, it's like, I'm going to take Cheez-Its and tofu and make a, whatever, 7-course meal.
You never know. You never know.
True. That's right. You make it fun at the same time.
That's
but
right.
Yeah, I think those are really important characteristics of how we think about it.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely.
So that's great. So I think, one of the things we wanted to really discuss, and, we hit on a lot of really interesting points, is the ability to identify what it is that the retail industry would really want to be able to do in terms of use cases, and talk about how Intel is actually allows us to be able to create the capacity, put the compute at the edge so that we can actually achieve these kinds of objectives, but then also leverage not just hardware, but software to be able to do that. So deploying the AI models, deploying the Kubernetes clusters and the containers that have the knowledge that allows us to be able to achieve those results. And so I think what we're seeing is really this great concept of being able to extend capacity out to the point of presence where the experience is really taking place. And that's really how it's going to impact the businesses, but also impact the users in a positive way. So I think that's really exciting. So I don't know if you have any final thoughts on, where we see things going. What do you think?
Well, I would just, if I was to reiterate just in 20 seconds, I would say, remember, this is a strategy. This isn't, let me go solve one problem, because it's too expensive to solve just one problem. So think of it as a strategy. Think of it as how can I utilize multiple use cases in order to bring business benefit. So I think I would leave it with that. And what we're seeing for the future is retailers are rethinking their architecture. They're rethinking how they're going to deploy, and they understand that this needs to happen. But calling on the insights, calling on Intel together, this is where the conversation can start and how we can help them move forward.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I definitely appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. And I love the fact that, we were kind of exploring, where are things going over time, because nobody really knows. But I think what's really exciting about what's happening now is not only was, generative AI a disruption, but I think Edge is disrupting the way that we think about applications as well. And so this was kind of, this momentum was already starting. I think AI just makes it more exciting for us into the future. So if you're ready to take the next step, well, you can scan this barcode and then contact us, and we'd love to help you understand how to take that journey on your own. And certainly we want to thank everybody for the time. Kristen, thank you again for joining me on the call today, and it's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Carm. Thank you.